The bell above the cafe door chimed softly again. Sunlight spilled through the front windows in muted ribbons, touching the rows of hanging plants and chalkboard menus dusted with espresso smudges. Issa Carrington stepped inside, an unassuming figure in her cream cardigan and jeans, hugging a weather-worn backpack against her chest like an anchor in a sea of strangers. It had been a week since that blind date. A week since the silence, the cheap text that broke her heart, and the kind stranger who paid her bill and left behind a note that said she still mattered. The words had found their way into her notebook, her thoughts, her mornings. She didn't admit it out loud, but every day since then she'd walked past this cafe, just to glance in, just to feel the air again, just in case life offered another impossible kindness. Now she sat at the same window seat, as if picking up a paused scene. Her textbook lay open beside a half-finished cup of coffee. She rubbed her tired eyes, trying to read about cognitive behavior and emotional resilience while quietly living proof of both. A breeze slipped through the door and lifted a few strands of her hair. The cafe buzzed around her, gentle conversations and steam hissing from the milk frother, a background orchestra of everyday life. Across the room, a tall man in a dark wool jacket paused mid-scroll on his tablet. Caleb Montgomery hadn't planned to stop here either. He was on his way to meet investors for lunch downtown, when the smell of roasted beans drifting through the open cafe door pulled him sideways into memory. When his eyes found her at the window, same cardigan, same soft focus on the world, his chest tightened. There she was, the girl who had shown up when no one else did. Caleb watched as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her focus half on the page, half on some distant thought. There was a calmness in her loneliness, not self-pity but quiet grit. He admired that. She had something he hadn't felt in months. Stillness without emptiness. He waited a full minute before he realized he was no longer actually reading the article on his screen. Then, almost against his own will, he closed the tablet, stood up, and crossed the room. Issa was lost in thought, jotting notes in the margin of her book when someone tapped lightly on her table. She looked up, startled, and there he was. "Still waiting on someone?" Caleb asked. His tone was friendly, patient, the faintest glimmer of humor hiding behind those steady eyes. Issa blinked, recognition rushing in. "You," she started, then smiled softly. "You again." "Guilty," he admitted, holding up his cup like evidence. "But this time, I come bearing my own coffee." He motioned toward the empty chair. "May I?" She hesitated only long enough for him to notice her blush. "Sure, though you might regret it. The Wi-Fi's moody today," Caleb chuckled as he sat down. "You and me both. Some days I can't get a signal to anything. People, work, even my own thoughts." Her laughter came easily, lightening the table between them. Soon their conversation drifted through comfortable small talk, weather, coursework, the absurdity of midterm season. Issa told him about her part-time job at the flower shop, where yesterday a customer returned an entire bouquet because the boyfriend picked peonies instead of roses. "Apparently that's a deal-breaker now," she said, rolling her eyes. "And you?" Caleb asked, resting his elbows on the table. "Ever return a bouquet over wrong flowers?" "Never," Issa said. "Free flowers are still flowers." He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, something uncoiled in him. He realized he was genuinely laughing. Deep, unguarded laughter that reached his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened, Issa noticed. Her gaze lingered on him, curious now instead of cautious. There was a gentleness behind his guarded exterior, the kind that came from someone who'd seen too much, yet still chose kindness. "You look like you've had one of those weeks," she said, half teasing. He tilted his head. "More like one of those years." "How bad?" Caleb hesitated, fingers tracing the curve of his coffee cup. Then his voice softened. 73 nights, he said. Issa frowned slightly. "What?" "I went 73 nights without really sleeping," he explained, eyes lowered. "Stress, panic attacks, the works. People kept calling me an inspiration, and I was barely staying upright. It's funny how success can be the loudest kind of loneliness." For a moment, the air stilled between them. The espresso machine hissed. Someone laughed across the room, but around their table everything went gently quiet. Issa closed her book, leaning forward. "I study psychology," she said. "Everyone assumes that means I know how to keep my own head straight. I don't. Yesterday I cried over burnt toast." Caleb chuckled faintly. "Sounds human to me." "That's the thing," she smiled. "Everyone talks about resilience like it's some superhero power, but sometimes it's just showing up, even when it hurts. Even when you're broke or tired or terrified, you'll be stood up again." He looked at her deeply now, seeing something far beyond the shy girl who had stared at her phone beneath golden lamplight a week ago. You kept the note, he said quietly. Her eyes widened. How did you? You looked like the type, he said with a small grin. Issa blushed, fumbling for her words. It meant more than you probably thought. That night I was done, honestly. And then there it was. One line that said I wasn't invisible. Caleb's throat tightened. He hadn't expected that his single act of kindness would ripple back to him like light off water. They sat for another hour, their cups empty, talking about everything and nothing, about music and midnight drives, about fear and faith, about how sometimes the smallest gesture can change the shape of loneliness. The world outside went on as usual. Buses passed, people hurried, the sky turned dusty rose, but at that small cafe table something slow and delicate bloomed. Not romance, not yet. Just the quiet understanding that somewhere between two strangers and one note, hope had found a seat. When Issa finally gathered her books, Caleb stood too. Well, she said smiling. That wasn't the worst blind date sequel ever, he laughed, holding the door for her. Next time, I'll make sure you don't have to pay. She glanced up at him. You already did. And before he could reply, she stepped into the fading sunlight, her hair catching gold in the breeze. Caleb stayed by the door a long moment, watching her leave. For the first time in months, the air around him felt warm. Sometimes he thought, showing up really is enough. Just kept working. Thought more hours meant more control. She set her cup down, tilted her head. That sounds like a nervous breakdown. Dressed in a nice suit. There was a beat. And then Caleb lawed loud and unfiltered. She had not said it to mock him. She had said it because it was true. And in that moment something softened. No awe, no flattery, just honesty, gentle but piercing. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't impressed by his title. She was just present. Midway through their coffee, Asmal boy, maybe 9, walked by the cafe window holding a tray of cookies. He stepped toward the door, but a barista caught him and politely ushered him away. Isla stood, walked to the boy, bought a box, and tucked an extra $2 into his palm. He blinked up at her. She just smiled. When she returned, Caleb asked, You always tip people who don't even work here? She shrugged. Sometimes people work harder outside than inside. Later, an elderly woman wandered in, confused by the digital menu. Issa rose again, no hesitation. She guided her through the screen, helped her order, and led her to a window seat. 2 minutes. That was all it took, but the cafe quieted slightly as if her kindness pulled the air into something softer. Caleb watched, not with admiration, but recognition. She did not act to be noticed. She acted because someone needed something, and she could help. That was enough. You're not what I expected, he said when she returned. Neither was the guy who ordered my dinner without asking, Ela replied with a small smile. Life's full of surprises, and it was. But the real surprise for Caleb wasn't her quick wit or even her generosity. It was this. For the first time in years, he did not check his watch, did not glance at his calendar, did not think about meetings, deadlines, or inboxes. He just stayed. And in the quiet gravity of her presence, something he had long buried began to stir. Not infatuation, not distraction, something deeper, something almost like peace. The event was held in a sleek downtown space. Soft jazz humming through speakers and trays of hors d'oeuvres floating between clusters of developers, investors, and polished professionals. Caleb's company was unveiling a new version of their mental wellness app tailored for college students under pressure. He had personally invited Issa, telling her, You've got a better instinct for what real people need than most of my marketing team. Issa arrived right on time, wearing her go-to floral dress, vintage, a little faded but clean and pressed. Over it, she wore a canvas tote with her university's crest and a small student volunteer badge. She had declined, and her roommate's offer told something more formal. This was who she was. Inside, everyone else looked effortlessly curated. Issa didn't blend in, but she didn't try to. Instead of gravitating toward the wine table or investor clusters, she made her way to the demo station where interns explained features to curious guests. Issa leaned in, asked questions about accessibility for students with learning differences, and gave quiet but thoughtful feedback on interface clarity and language tone. Her voice was soft, but her suggestions were practical and grounded in user experience. A well-dressed woman nearby, likely in her 40 seconds and holding a glass of rosé, turned toward Ela with a smile too sharp to be friendly. You must be the CEO's girlfriend, she said, her tone light but condescending. That thrift store chic thing is really brave. Issa blinked, then smiled gently, but not passively. Well, she replied, you don't have to spend much to show up with dignity. The air shifted. The woman raised an eyebrow, said nothing more. Issa turned back to the interns, undisturbed. Across the room, Caleb saw it unfold. He hadn't meant to watch, but he knew that kind of dig. Polite on the surface, poisonous underneath. And he saw how Isa met it. Calm, clear, composed, no shame, no theatrics, just strength. He felt that quiet tug again. The one that started the moment he watched her counting change for a cup of coffee. She didn't need rescuing. She only needed to not be underestimated. After the event, he found her by the coat rack brushing lint off her tote. "Hungry?" he asked. "Always," she said, smiling. They walked past a dozen polished restaurants and turned down a quieter street until they reached a small pizza joint with sticky counters and a humming neon sign. They ordered 2 slices, found a booth beneath a flickering light, and shared a bottle of soda like it was vintage red over paper napkins and grease-stained plates. Isa spoke, not in a dramatic way, just honestly. "My mom worked 3 jobs when I was in high school. Janitor, cafeteria worker, and nighttime receptionist. Sometimes she'd fall asleep standing while waiting on laundry." Caleb listened, elbows on the formica table, eyes steady. She'd say, "We can't choose what we're handed, but we can choose how we hold it." On hard days, she'd light a dollar store candle at dinner and call it fancy. Caleb smiled, not with pity but with something like reverence. "She sounds like someone I would have liked. She'd have liked you," Isa said, then added, "though she'd probably have grilled you first." Caleb chuckled. "That seems fair." They walked home under a flickering streetlight, their steps unhurried, no declarations, no hands held yet, just 2 people sharing quiet space, letting something grow. And somewhere between a $5 dinner and the soft echo of worn shoes on pavement, Caleb knew Isla wasn't just someone he admired. She was someone he didn't want to walk away from. The first time Isla stepped into Caleb's office, she was visibly nervous. The building was sleek and intimidating, with polished concrete floors and white oak walls. Everyone walked fast, dressed in smart casual confidence. Isla, in her soft blue cardigan and canvas shoes, felt like a misplaced bookmark in a hardcover world. But Caleb greeted her at the elevator himself. No assistant, no clipboard, just him, smiling in a way that made her shoulders lower half an inch. He showed her around, introducing her to the product team as a perspective we need, not just want. Isla offered insights on the app's navigation features, suggesting tweaks for first-time users and those unfamiliar with digital wellness tools. She spoke simply but precisely. No jargon, just empathy backed by experience. The team listened, Caleb noticed. From then on, she started visiting the office once a week to consult on usability. Their conversations gradually bled into lunch breaks, shared sandwiches on the rooftop terrace, where Isa would tease Caleb for never remembering to bring napkins. He started forwarding her articles at midnight, usually things she had already read, but she replied anyway, often with a meme or a line from Rumi. She became a soft part of his days, a good part, and never told her how much those emails meant, or how he reread them when he could not sleep. One Tuesday afternoon, Isa came by earlier than expected. She had picked up a printed wireframe of the app interface from the design team, and thought it might help to walk Caleb through it before his executive meeting. She knocked gently. No response. Théodore was ajar. She peeked in. Caleb sat at the far end of the room, shoulders hunched, eyes closed. His breathing was sharp, uneven. One hand clutched the edge of the table. His phone screen was on, vibrating silently with back-to-back messages. The untouched coffee beside him had gone cold. Isa froze for a second, then stepped inside. She did not speak right away. She didn't ask if he was okay. Instead, she gently set the papers down, walked over, and placed a hand warm light on his shoulder. "Breathe in," she said softly. 4 counts. He didn't move. Out for 7. His chest rose, fell again and again. She stayed still. Her presence a steady anchor in a room spinning too fast. No judgment, no pity, just presence. Caleb's breathing began to even out. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking as if surfacing from deep water. "You always show up early," he managed to whisper. She smiled. "Only on Tuesdays." There was a silence after that, but it was not awkward. It was soft, like the silence of 2 people who knew they had just crossed into something unspoken. He leaned back in his chair, ran a hand through his hair, still a little shaky. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be," she replied. "It happens, not to CEOs." "It does," she said. "You just don't hear about it because most CEOs don't let anyone see." He looked at her. Truly looked. "You didn't flinch." He said, "I did," she confessed. "But not because of you. Because I've been there too." That moment, brief, quiet, was not dramatic. But for Caleb, it was everything. No one in his world, not even his closest partners, had ever seen him like that and stayed. Isa did not just stay. She studied. That evening, when she left, he walked her to the elevator. Before the doors closed, he asked almost without thinking, "Will you be back next Tuesday?" She nodded. "Same time with napkins," he laughed. Not the polite kind, the kind that made his chest feel a little lighter. That night, alone in his office, he opened his laptop. There was an email from her already. Subject line, "Reminder, you're still human." Inside was a quote, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, 'I'll try again tomorrow.'" Caleb read it twice, then whispered to the empty room, "Thank you." He wasn't just smiling, he was breathing. The offer came 2 weeks later. Isla was sitting by the window at the bookstore where she still worked part-time when she received the email from Caleb's company. It was an invitation, an official offer to join the product development team for the mental health app she had helped improve during her visits. The position wasn't flashy, the title wasn't impressive, but it was real. Still, Issa hesitated. She reread the email 3 times. The job description sounded like a dream, and yet her chest tightened with uncertainty. She didn't have a degree yet. She wasn't from the world Caleb came from, of polished resumes and networking brunches. What if she wasn't good enough? She drafted a polite rejection, fingers trembling over the keyboard until another email came in. This time from Caleb himself. Subject, about the seat at the table. "You don't need to prove yourself. You just need to stay yourself. We already see what you bring. It's more than enough." She stared at the screen for a full minute. Then she clicked reply and typed just 2 words. "I'm in." The following week, they sat side by side at the very same cafe where everything had started. The warm hum of the espresso machine, the clinking of cups, the soft indie music, it all felt familiar. Yet now, the table between them held 2 laptops and half-eaten pastries instead of silence and hesitation. They weren't on a date. They weren't pretending to be anything. They were just together. Issa was reviewing user feedback notes, scrolling through comments from college students who had used the app during a pilot run. She flagged a few that mentioned technical jargon, then leaned over to Caleb's screen. "See, this one says the self-assessment questions felt too clinical. Maybe we could rephrase them, make it feel more like a conversation than a diagnosis." Caleb looked at her, then the screen, then back at her. "You're right again." She shrugged. "People want to feel understood, not labeled." Caleb smiled, but Issa's attention had already shifted. Her eyes caught something on the corkboard near the cafe counter. A small, slightly faded piece of paper tacked between flyers for community yoga and weekend poetry nights. She stood up, walked over, and stared. It was the receipt. $6.20 paid by guest. A handwritten note beneath it read, "She couldn't pay, so someone else did and changed 2 lives." Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper. Her throat tightened. Caleb joined her a moment later, following her gaze. "You kept it," Isla whispered. He nodded. The manager said it started more conversations than any marketing poster ever could. They stood there quiet. Then Isla looked up at him. "I wasn't just short on money that day, Caleb." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. She returned to her seat, feeling something inside her shift. This cafe wasn't just where she was stood up. It was where someone saw her, where someone stayed. And now it was where she worked, where her voice mattered. Back at the table, Caleb slid a warm cup of coffee toward her. No words, no grand gestures. Just a seat, just space, just presence. And for Isla Carrington, that was everything. It started as a whisper in the elevator. By lunch, it had a headline. "From coffee to corner office, CEO's alleged relationship with young new hire raises eyebrows." The article didn't name Issa directly, but it did not need to. Her description, blonde psychology grad recently hired into development team, was enough for people to put faces to gossip. The comments online were worse than the article itself. Words like opportunist, inappropriate, and unethical were thrown around like confetti. No one mentioned her contributions to the product, her late nights fixing bugs in beta, her user insight reports that turned into action plans. No one cared. By 3:00 p.m., a shareholder had called for an internal review. By 4:15, Isla had packed her things into a recycled paper bag and left the office quietly through the back stairwell. She did not call Caleb. She couldn't. Her heart felt like it had been split into halves. One still defending him from the sidelines, the other breaking under the weight of what she now believed was inevitable. She had ruined the one good thing that had happened to her. That night she sat by her window, staring into the dark city. Rain tapped against the glass like it had something urgent to say. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. There was only silence, and a resignation deeper than fear. And then a knock at the door, firm, familiar. She opened it slowly. Caleb stood there, hair soaked, shirt clinging to his skin, water dripping from his sleeves. In one hand, a folded copy of the article already soggy. In the other, nothing. Not a briefcase, not an umbrella, just himself. Issa's breath caught in her throat. He didn't speak right away. The storm behind him made the hallway feel like a movie set. too dramatic to be real. But his eyes, those steady steel blue eyes, were raw and clear. "You didn't cost me anything," he said finally, holding up the paper. "You reminded me what matters." Issa shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "You could lose everything. Your board, your investors. They'll still be there," he interrupted gently. "But if you're not, I won't be." She looked away. Her hands trembled. "I never wanted to be there, Azen. You got pulled into anything messy," she said. "I never wanted to matter that much." Caleb stepped closer, too late. There was a pause, a breath suspended in the storm. Then, for the first time, he reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, damp from the rain. But they wrapped around hers with a kind of finality, a kind of truth. "I've spent most of my life building walls," he said softly, "and you showed up with a cup of coffee and somehow walked through all of them." Issa laughed, half a sob, half disbelief. "You're ridiculous," she whispered, and yet he smiled. "You're still standing here." She looked down at their hands. He was still wet, still ridiculous, still him. And for once she stopped running. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay. I'm not walking away." Caleb's shoulders dropped as if he'd been holding up the sky. He stepped inside, dripping puddles on her hardwood floor, and closed the door behind him. They stood there for a while, two soaked souls who had both tried too long to carry their lives alone. Finally, Issa spoke again, her voice steadier. "Just so you know, I didn't fall for you because you paid for my coffee." "I know," he replied. "But I think I fell for you the moment you tipped a kid selling cookies in the rain." A pause. "Also," he added with Agrin, "your Wi-Fi jokes are wildly underrated." She nudged him playfully, then leaned in, forehead resting against his chest. She could feel his heart beating fast but sure. He wrapped his arms around her. Not as a savior, not as a CEO, just a man who had finally stopped hiding, and a girl who finally knew what it meant to stay. 1 year later, Ella stood beneath soft stage lights in a simple white dress and beige flats. No sparkle, no spectacle, just presence. She looked out at the audience. Students, therapists, donors, professors, all gathered for Theone Year Gala of the Second Cup, the non-profit she now ran, dedicated to providing free mental health care to struggling college students. The name had been her idea, a tribute to the day a stranger bought her coffee and quietly changed the entire course of her life. Caleb sat in the front row, not as the CEO on the brochure or the keynote speaker, but as the man who never left, even when staying was the harder thing to do. Issa stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady but soft. 1 year ago, she began, I couldn't afford a cup of coffee or a kind word, but someone saw me, not for what I lacked, but for what I carried. This place, this mission. It all began with a bill I could not pay, and a man who quietly said, "It's on me." The room fell into reverent silence, the kind that holds space for something sacred. Eyes welled with tears. Some smiled knowingly, remembering that exact feeling of being seen for the first time. She did not mention his name. She didn't need to. When the applause came, it was thunderous, real, raw, earned. Isa stepped off the stage as cameras flashed, as hands reached out for congratulatory shakes. But her eyes scanned for one face only. And there he was, standing just off to the side in a navy blue suit, his expression unreadable except to her. He wasn't holding flowers. He wasn't down on one knee, but in his hand was a small navy box worn at the corners, like it had been opened and closed 100 times before tonight. When she reached him, he said nothing at first, just opened the lid to reveal a simple platinum band. Inside, it was engraved with 5 words, "Nobles, just forever." Issa blinked, the room fading behind her. Then Caleb finally spoke, voice low, just for her. "I don't want to be the man who pays your bills, Isla. I want to be the man who stays when life gets expensive. Will you let me stay? Not for coffee, not for rescue, but for love." She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her tears answered first, followed by the softest nod. One that carried the weight of everything she had endured, everything they had built, and everything they now stood to begin. "You're the only thing I never asked for," she whispered, voice breaking. "But somehow the only thing I ever needed." Caleb smiled. No cameras, no press releases, just him, her, and a moment that would belong only to them. That night, they left the gala quietly, slipping away into the cool October air. The city hummed around them, alive, but not loud. As they reached the familiar street corner, Isa paused. The little indie cafe was still open, glowing warm yellow against the dark sidewalk. She smiled, pulled the door open, and looked at the barista she knew well by now. "2 lattes, please," she said. "This one's on me." The barista blinked, then grinned. Caleb watched her from the entrance, her hair slightly windswept, her smile soft but certain. He stepped forward, took her hand, and slid the ring onto her finger, right there by the door where it all began. No one watched. No one needed to, because some moments are not meant for an audience. They're meant for hearts that have already found home. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and hit the hype button to support more heartfelt tales like this. Love doesn't always arrive with flowers or fireworks. Sometimes it starts with a simple cup of coffee and someone who chooses to stay. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it's just the beginning.